Former President of the European Council, dear Herman, Rector, dear Federica, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. In the short movie, it was mentioned that there are two governments which are at parity between women and men. I think Norway and Spain was mentioned. Actually, there's at least three, because the Belgian government is also at parity between men and women. I will accept that it was omitted in that movie. The movie also says that parity governments actually deliver quite good results. I think that was the way it was mentioned. I actually think parity governments really rock. I think we give great results. But I will let you judge that for yourself on the quality of the Belgian government as well. I think you will learn here to make up your own mind. First of all, it is obviously an honor for me to open together with you this new academic year of the College of Europe. This is a distinguished institution known for its excellent research, outstanding education, and since recently also its very well documented lockdown parties. That obviously was last year. That is not going to be you, as far as I've understood. Allow me to start with a Belgian message that I believe has some European relevance. And the core of my message is, too often, the European debate is about institutions, where it really should be about people. Now, why am I calling this quote-unquote a Belgian message? Well, because Belgium has a lot of experience in this field. We are institutional reform champions. Between 1970 and 2011, Belgium has had 6 state reforms. That means basically every 8 years. Every 8 years, we reshuffle our constitutional architecture. These state reforms, they deliver good results when they focus on people's lives, when they move the country forward as a whole. However, they do not deliver when dictated by dogma, and as a consequence, efficiency is pushed aside. To me, that is an important message from Belgium to Europe, to stay away from institutional dogmatism. The last thing we need is a big ideological clash. The Euro-federalists versus the Eurosceptics, a trench war between extremes. Institutional reforms that eat energy and bandwidth, focused inward while the wider world moves forward. This world that provides generations with plenty of opportunities, but for many people is also a source of insecurity and threats. Climate change, the digital revolution, migration, offshoring of jobs. Global issues, but directly impacting people's lives. We have had crisis after crisis after crisis. It tested our belief in progress. The belief that we have our destiny in our own hands. It's Europe's role to restore this belief, to come up with answers to those insecurities, protecting people, protecting our interests, protecting our European values. Not with a protectionist project, but with an empowering project, reconciling openness to the world with security for the people. Not pulling up a drawbridge, but using our openness to shape the world, engaging with others to set the standards, defining the playing field. Europe was precisely born to seize these opportunities while managing the threats, both a peace project and a project of economic opportunities. Especially today, in these uncertain times, we have to bring this balancing act between openness and protection again to the heart of our union. This is what we aimed for during the COVID crisis. This is what we should aim for in tackling the climate crisis. But before I discuss COVID and climate, I want to take a step back. Back to 2016, back to Brexit. Weirdly enough, Brexit meant the rebirth of the European spirit, or at least the rebirth of the notion that Europe works best when it is united. On the way to the exit, the British government wanted to rummage one last time in the bucket of European benefits. All the blessings of Europe, especially the single market, but none of the burden. In the sight of the endgame, the UK government tried to divide us. They tested our political unity, but we succeeded. Michel Barnier and the European Commission took into account every sensibility and every sensitivity of every member state and merged it into one solid European position. Faced with the prospect of losing what was dearest to us, the internal market as an engine of our prosperity, we wrote it out together. At the outset, most observers predicted a domino effect, more member states leaving, a Mexican army strategy, a union dispersing in all directions. But what we saw was the opposite. Europe didn't undergo Brexit. We led it. There was no domino effect. 2 months after the British referendum, support for EU membership grew by 5%. 4 years after Brexit, the support for the EU had even risen by more than 10% in countries like the Netherlands and the Nordics. We rediscovered the power of our unity. We saw the same sequence of events with COVID-19. At the outset, Europe was overly cautious. Wait and see. We didn't even have a common approach for mouth masks and for ventilators. 4 health ministers from Germany, France, Italy, and the Netherlands coordinated among themselves. Their message was, healthcare is a national competency. Vaccines are none of Europe's business. Institutionally, you can't argue with that. But looking at the reality on the ground, it did not make any sense. COVID-19 was a global problem, and we needed a European solution. As Commission President von der Leyen would coin it later, this was Europe's moment. And that is actually how it goes nowadays. With each major crisis erupting on our continent, there is a push from below, a push from the people. We have seen this push again recently in energy. Price hikes were driven by the world market, so people looked beyond their governments and urged Europe to act. While politicians look at the institutional framework and see impossibilities, people see the problem and they ask, who has the solution? Where is Europe to protect me? In their eyes, member states cannot do it alone anymore. Like it or not, people have raised the bar, especially your generation. You expect more from your governments, irrespective of where that government actually resides. And that's the good news. People have not given up on Europe. Even when in the recent past, Europe has often acted too little, too late. Even if Europe often organized its own delivery gap, for example, during the sovereign debt crisis or the migration crisis. Despite all these shortcomings, people have not given up on Europe. They understand very well what's going on in the world. They unmask fake news and disinformation, even if it's written on a very large red bus in the center of London. People perfectly understand that global challenges can never be solved by turning our backs to each other, by locking ourselves up in our national capitals. They urge us to cooperate, to work together. And during COVID, that is what European leaders did. They turned things around. The initial aid package of barely 30 million euro became a 750 billion euro investment plan. The initial failure on mouth masks and ventilators was transformed into a common European vaccine strategy. From development over production to shots in the arm, Europe showed itself to be a world leader. Not even Marine Le Pen or Matteo Salvini dare to argue that individual member states would have done a better job. What we saw during the COVID crisis was once again openness and protection combined. A Europe that remained open for business. We kept trade lanes open. While the United States chose for full protectionism with their Defense Act, Europe exported 1 billion vaccines, of which 700 million actually were produced here in Belgium. And next to our openness, Europe protected. Europe secured the health of its citizens. Europe did indeed whatever it takes to get out of the health crisis. And this time, we did not outsource the whatever it takes to technocrats. Like in 2008 with the financial crisis, when we asked the ECB to save the day because the Council couldn't agree on a European banking union and a European fiscal union. By the way, 12 years down the road, the Eurogroup is still discussing these proposals. The lesson of the past decade is that Europe is strong when member states jump over their own shadows, when we don't lose ourselves in institutional quagmire, but see the common European interest, compromise and act on it. A lesson we must take to heart as we are tackling the climate crisis. With Fit for 55, Europe is showing the way forward. We have a comprehensive strategy, a thorough reform of the emission trading scheme, a focus on renewable and energy efficiency, but also plans for carbon border adjustment mechanism, forcing trading partners to act as well. But apart from the policies, it will be our mindset that makes the difference. Not to see the climate challenge as something constraining us, but as an opportunity to innovate. It is as much about sustainable living as it is about building a new economy. We will not reverse climate change with a policy of less growth, less consumption, less economic activity, because that would lead inevitably to less investment, less solutions, less prospects. People want to move forward in life, get more out of life, not less. This is human nature, it's biological. If Europe wants to beat climate change, it will be with a strategy of more. More, but different. With new technologies, like green hydrogen and efficient wind turbines, developed here, in Europe, and exported to the rest of the world. That is the way forward. Again, reconciling openness with protection. By innovating and at the same time protecting our middle class. Protecting our prosperity, current and future. Since we will leave no one behind in this climate transition, we will make it a gradual one. Citizens should not be taken by surprise, should not be placed before a fait accompli. The best way to protect people is making sure they are part of this change. That sustainable technologies are affordable. Electric cars are not something for the happy few, but for every European. That the energy bill goes down thanks to renewables. That people have the right skills for the green jobs. We can do this. Europe can do this. With the Recovery and Resilience Fund, we have for the first time a real European economic strategy. All member states choosing a clear common direction. Using the scale of our single market and leveraging the innovative strength of European companies, from Stockholm to Sofia. That will be our message, our European message next week in Glasgow. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not only our climate that is under pressure. Our liberal democracy is challenged as well. What used to be self-evident 10 years ago is no longer today. When I was a teenager, when the Iron Curtain came down, liberal democracy was something people worldwide aspired for, admired us for. Today, the leaders of China and Russia have chosen a different path, the path of autocracy. Even here in Europe, some want to install illiberal democracy, as if something like that actually would exist. Liberal democracy is not the easiest answer to our current challenges, but it is the right one, for the simple reason that it means all of us deciding together on where we are headed. Liberal democracy is not about having a strong leader. It is about strong leadership. It is my deep conviction that strong leadership is based on diversity and on inclusion. Liberal democracy is as much about protecting minorities, protecting diversity, as it is about the power of majority. Otherwise, you will end up with John Stuart Mill's warning, the tyranny of the majority over the minority. This tyranny is exactly what is popping up in Europe today. Governments attacking the free press, denigrating Muslims and immigrants, denying fundamental rights to women and to LGBTI people. While our European liberal democracy is exactly the opposite. It is about human decency, personal freedom, and allowing people of all walks of life to live their lives freely and come together in one society. It is, above all, ladies and gentlemen, about the separation of powers, the trias politica. A victory at the ballot box does not mean absolute power. Independent courts enforcing civil liberties are a crucial part of democracy, because it are these courts that need to be strong enough to stand up against the tyrannic majority. This is why the recent attack on the European Court of Justice is completely unacceptable. European governments that are not willing to respect the ground rules of liberal democracy, they undermine all trust. Trust between member states, trust between the peoples of Europe. Trust we need if we want a common future. To those who give incendiary interviews and think it's necessary to declare a new world war in the Financial Times, I want to say, you are playing a dangerous game. You are playing with fire when waging war with our European colleagues for internal political reasons. This is not about misplaced arrogance of the so-called old member states. Yes, maybe founding members of us sometimes were guilty of camping on the moral high ground, but not this time. This is not an issue of West against East, of old against new. This is about an overwhelming majority of member states, from the Baltics to Portugal, who agree our union is a union of values, not a cash machine. You cannot pocket all the money, but refuse the values. So what is the way out of this stalemate? We should not kick these countries out, as some suggest. We should call them out. We should not take their bait, but instead, we should listen to the message of 100,000 Polish citizens who took the streets carrying the Polish flag with the European flag, side by side, to refute firebrand tactics, a message President von der Leyen understood very well. That is why she is considering an infringement procedure and preparing the use of the rule of law conditionality. We are all awaiting the ruling of the European Court of Justice on the instrument of conditionality. But make no mistake, the European Council should not let the European Court of Justice fight this fight on its own. We should avoid past mistakes and not leave it to the Court of Justice to solve this crisis on its own, just as we left it to the ECB to clean up the sovereign debt crisis on its own. This is a fundamental political problem that needs to be solved politically by the Council and by the European Parliament, by setting out and anchoring the ground rules of our union, the rule of law, democracy, and all the fundamental rights, things that have been so self-evident for so long, but it seems no longer are today. And by making these ground rules enforceable, better than they are today. If we really want a Europe that delivers, a phrase that we have heard so often. We need to fix this problem. Anything short of this would mean little more than rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. This rule of law discussion is existential. But we should be aware that it is also inward-looking. While we are struggling to enforce the ground rules of the European Union, the rest of the world is moving forward, and the real work is actually waiting. And that is to better protect our European interests, to construct European sovereignty next to national sovereignty. Because individual member states, even the big ones, are confronted with their own limits, with their inability to make an impact. Well, the very definition of sovereignty precisely is the ability to control your own destiny. During the Syrian war and the migration crisis, we saw that national sovereignty didn't cut it. The day more than 1 million refugees showed up at our borders, member states, big and small, were taken by surprise. That was in 2015. Today, we see exactly the same issues arising in the August conflict and with the withdrawal from Afghanistan. We need urgently to shed off our naivete. There is no such thing as a solid foreign policy that is not grounded in defending our own interests. The interests of Europeans should be the very compass of our foreign policy. Europe is second to none in soft power, in trade, in economics, in diplomacy, in fighting climate change. But in today's world, that means very little without being backed by hard power. We are a giant, but we are a gentle giant. We need to develop and grow our hard power. China uses it all the time to leverage its economic ambitions. The Belt and Road Initiative is economic and geopolitical at the same time. Russia weaponizes its gas and other resources to grow its sphere of influence. And the United States switches between free trade and protectionism depending on what's best for them, not for us. That is the reason we need to build European defense capabilities, to create that hard power to back our soft power. Also to be a better partner to NATO, but more so to create smart power. That is what strategic autonomy should be about, securing our prosperity through hard capabilities. Because more and more industries are becoming geopolitical. Let me just give you two examples from Belgium, healthcare and semiconductors. The goods produced in these industries are so vital for our future well-being that our very survival depends on it. For healthcare, I guess that's stating the obvious. But the same goes for semiconductors. That might sound abstract to some ears and far removed from our daily lives. But the opposite is true. Semiconductors are used in almost every product on the market, from headphones to computers to cars to heavy machinery that produce all other goods. Without microchips, our economy would collapse. But there's the problem. Europe is world-class in R&D, and we are the biggest users of semiconductors in the world. But all the producers are either American or Asian. That is not just economic weakness. That is giving our competitors the ultimate power over our destiny. An existential risk that we cannot afford. That is what makes this whole discussion geopolitical. A case in point why Europe needs strategic autonomy. Maintaining our openness, but adding the strategic perspective of protecting our interests. Not locking ourselves up in splendid isolation, but making sure that others need us as much as we need them. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you can do this, because Europe has done it before. Together we have overcome major obstacles and launched even greater projects. The great generations of Schuman and Monnet, of Adenauer and de Gasperi, of Mitterrand and Kohl. Today, it's up to us, to our generation, to you. We too must build Europe. We will have to do it our own way. Gone are the days of the smoky backrooms. It will no longer be visionary leaders that drive Europe forward. It will be visionary European citizens that demand more from European politics, pushing their leaders forward. That is my definition of an ever closer union. A union closer to its people, more capable of empowering, freeing, and protecting them. A union that gives back the belief in progress to all Europeans, that progress is possible, that progress is there for all. I thank you.